Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwara, Gurureva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam, Trilokyam Sacharacharam, Tatpadam Darshitam Yena, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Twameva Mata Chapita, Twameva Bandhuscha Sakha, Twameva Vedyan Ravitam, Twameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva, Twameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Matra Rupena Sanstita, Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Shakti Rupena Sanstita, Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Buddhi Rupena Sanstita, Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Lakshmi Rupena Sanstita, Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. So I think we start the 15th chapter this evening?
Yes, that's right.
Ganesh, will you help us out, please?
Sure. Iti shrutva shailalokhyanam atyadbhutam. Iti shrutva shailaloka vyakhyanam adbhutam tada bhuyotyantam vismito bhuta Ramo Bhrugukulodvaha. Thus, having heard the extremely wonderful story of the world within the mountain, Rama of the Bhrigu family was very much surprised again.
So we're back to our framing story about Parashurama. He's now heard the story of Mahasena and the Muniputra, and he's quite surprised and amazed. Going on.
Vimrishya Guruna Proktam Buddhaya Nishchitya Shuddhaya Dattathreyam Punargatva Natva Paprachasadaram. Reflecting on what was told by the Guru, ascertaining with a pure intellect and going to Dattatreya again, he asked him with respect, having bowed to him.
So he now has some more questions. Let's see what they are. Going on.
Bhagavan Yatpaya Proktam Yakyanai Vividhai Stutat Tatra Sarami Yajnanam Mayatyantam Vicharatah. Holy One, what was explained by you by various stories there? This much of essence was understood by me through investigation very much.
So during his own investigation, he has been able to verify the validity of what Dattatreya has told him. So again, we have these four authorities that we use in this work. The highest truth is set forth in Shruti, in the scriptures themselves. Then we have the authoritative exclamations of the great saints and sages through time who thunder, it's true, it's true. Then we have our own logical reasoning, our own manana. Some people stop there, and then you only have an indirect knowledge. Then, as the result of our nididhyasana, our long and continuous meditation, we come to the direct experience of it ourselves, the fourth command. So here, Parashurama has been able to investigate this and maybe has some experience so far. So he's in the first three of these authorities. Going on.
Samvedanam satyamekam samvedyam tatra kalpitam adarshanagara prakhyam vrishaiva pravibhavitam. The one knowledge or consciousness is the truth. The knowable object is imagined there. It is similar to a city seen in a mirror and is only imagined falsely.
So here he sums up what he's understood. Who I am is consciousness. The ground of being of the whole creation is consciousness, always experienced as a subjective reality. I. And the knowable, gross and subtle, in all states, at all times, on all levels, is mithya, illusion. Pranti, delusion. Pratibimba, like a reflection in a mirror. Next one.
Sachiti parama shaktihi samvidrupa maheshwari swatma bhittau jagat chitram avyaktadi prabheditam bhasayet swatantriyamatrad nirupadana hetukam etavattu maya jnatam Vicharya Sukshmaya Dhiya. That supreme consciousness power of the nature of transcendental consciousness, the supreme goddess, Tripura, can manifest the picture of the world, divided into the unmanifest, for the mind full of mental impressions, and the rest on the screen of her own self, consequent on her mere freedom of will without any material cause. This much has been understood by me, having investigated with a subtle intellect.
Yes. So this phenomenal world actually didn't begin 14.3 billion years ago. It's now, always in the now being manifested on the screen of consciousness itself. What the infinite will imagine, God only knows. Literally. But the ground of being, which you and I experience as I, is never touched by it. Just the pictures change. Going on.
किन्त्वेवं विधसंवित्तिः वेद्यवन्ध्यानिरूपितात् उपलब्धुम् अशक्यैव सवेद्यायाः सदा स्थितेः वेद्यं विना तु संवित्तेः कथं स्यादुपलम्भनम् उपलम्भं विना तस्याः पुरुषार्थेन विद्यते. But consciousness of this kind, ascertained to be destitute of the known or unknowable objects, is not surely possible to be obtained or experienced on account of its existence with the known or knowable objects always. How can there be the direct perception of pure consciousness without the objects known or knowable by it? Without the direct perception of that pure consciousness, there is no attainment of the object of human life.
So we have the scriptures holding out this state, nirvikalpa samadhi, where the distinction between knower, knowing, and known is gone. Where we have manonasha, the destruction of the mind. And here Parashurama says, my experience is the mind never stops, and my perception of the world never stops. Is it really possible to have nirvikalpa samadhi, to end the world or the perception of the world? If samadhi is the attainment that we seek for, or is it just a romantic idea? Is this it? Is this the end of the knowledge I can get, the experience I can get? The mind and the world will continue. I just need to know that I don't have to take it seriously. It's a doubt many of us have. Let's see what happens.
पुरुषार्थोऽपि मोक्षस्यात् सवा किंविध उच्यते विज्ञाने सति मोक्षस्यात् mukte vyavahriti katham. If that object of human life is liberation from the bondage of human existence, of what kind is it declared to be? If there is liberation when there is knowledge, how does action occur after liberation?
Interesting. So if liberation is the goal, really, what is it? Are there levels of liberation? And if when a person is liberated, does the body fall off dead? Or does action continue? Is there such a thing as the Jivan Mukti? The person who is liberated while alive in this world. We normally contrast Jivan Mukta with Videho Moksha, liberation beyond the body. Some scriptures, by the way, will say that being liberated beyond the body is what happens to the man of knowledge in the world as he's functioning in the world. Most people define it as after you die, you go away. Brahmaloka at the end of the age, you're liberated beyond the body. But the point we're getting at here is moksha or freedom, something that happens in the future. Or am I doomed to continue this experience of the phenomenal world lifetime after lifetime? I may know I'm not witnessing consciousness, but the world with its vicissitudes continues to appear to me. Let's see. Going on.
ज्ञानिनोऽपि च दृश्यन्ते व्यवहारपरायणाः कथं तेषां हि संवेद्य मुक्तं संवेदनं स्थितम्. Even those possessed of spiritual knowledge are seen devoted to work. How indeed does consciousness exist for them, liberated from the known or knowable objects?
So, what is the experience of the man of realization? We see him or her, see her functioning in the world. It's interesting. A couple weeks ago, I follow the Chinmaya Mission, Swami Chinmayananda posts on Facebook, and somebody had a list of a day of Swamiji's itinerary, all the things he did through the day. He was answering, responding to a letter, I guess, or something. What do you do all day, you know? Others sit in samadhi for a long time. Some teach. The great mid-20th century saint Anandamayi Ma, she did not teach at all. She had no disciples, only devotees. Some jnanis have a lot of shakti, others not so much. How do we see these differences? Going on.
स्थितायां शुद्धसंवित्तौ व्यवहारकथं भवेत् विज्ञानम् एकरूपं वै मोक्षोऽप्येकफलं भवेत् तत्कथं ज्ञानिनां भेदः स्थितौ लोके हि दृश्यते. When pure consciousness is steady, how can there be work? Knowledge is indeed of one nature, and liberation, its result, would also be one. Then how indeed is difference observed in the condition of knowers of truth in the world?
Yes. So if part of the mark of the person of liberation is all vasanas are gone, they're roasted, what is there that can cause action? If consciousness is one and the same, why do we see what appears to be different behavior, different vyavahara from jnani to jnani? Very good question. Common doubt. Many people get caught up in trying to psych out who's realized and who's not realized, or who's more realized. My guru is more realized than your guru. My guru is fully realized. I'm a devotee of Amaji, Swamiji. Are there levels of realization? Some people know more self than another. Good questions. Let's see. Going on.
केचित् कर्म प्रकुर्वन्ति काले सच्चास्त्रचोदितम् केचित् समाराधयन्ति देवतां भिन्नवर्त्मभिः केचित् समाधिपरमाः संहृतेन्द्रियमण्डलाः केचित् तपः प्रकुर्वन्ति देहेन्द्रियविशोषणम् केचिच्छान् बोधयन्ति पृथक् प्रवचनैः स्फुटं केचित् राज्यं प्रशासन्ति दण्डिनीत्युक्तवर्त्मनां केचित् प्रवादं कुर्वन्ति सदस्सु प्रतिवादिभिः केचिशास्त्राणि विविधान् केचिशास्त्राणि विविधा अन्यजास्त्रं रचयन्ति वै अन्ये केवलमुग्धत्वम् आवहन्ति सदैव हि. Some perform work as directed by good scriptures at the proper time. Some worship the deity in different ways. Some solely engaged in samadhi or absorption in the self, have their groups of sense organs withdrawn. Some are engaged in spiritual austerity, which dries up their bodies and senses. Some teach their disciples clearly through different expositions. Some rule the country by the way indicated in the science of politics. Some are engaged in philosophical disputations with opponents in assemblies. Some constantly write various scriptures. Others always wear a foolish or innocent nature alone.
So here he's talking about the different modes of action, the different behaviors of Mahatmas. Why is there a difference? Going on.
Kopi loka vigarhyayam tu vritim nityamihastitaah ta ime jnanina iti prathita bhurishochanehi. Some are also engaged here daily in a behavior which is reproachable by people. These very persons are proclaimed as one possessed of spiritual knowledge with much sorrow.
So some engage in behavior, they may be sexual rues. I'm reading a biography of an Agori master with Mauricio, and some of the practices that are done in the Agoro tradition, other people would just be horrified. Do they know a different self? Do they have a different experience of ultimate reality? I had a very dear friend who was a Pure Land Buddhist. Roger Corliss was his name. He was a retired professor of comparative religion from Duke University, settled out here in California. And he was of the mind that there is no ultimate reality, that what the Buddhist experienced was different than what the Hindu experienced, which was different than what the Christian mystic experienced. There may be some common points of practice. He was a Shunyavadan. There is no ultimate truth or reality. Is that the truth? Very interesting. Next one.
Tatkatham sadhana phala abhedepi sthiti bhinnata kimete samavijnanaha taratamya mutashritah. Then how is there difference in the states, even when there is no difference in the means and result, that is knowledge and liberation? Are they persons having the same knowledge, or are they resting on difference in knowledge?
So we seem to have common points of practice to summarize various modes of purification of the mind. Then, with a purified or sattvic mind, we inquire into our self nature. And if we realize that the ground of being is pure consciousness, and the phenomenal world comes about like images in a mirror through sankalpa, why is it that we see all these differences? Going on.
Etat sarvam asheshena pravaktum me samarhasi shishyenya nisargas sadayam manah. You're worthy of telling me all this completely. Your mind is naturally compassionate to your disciple who has no other refuge.
So basically, he's saying, Dr. G, I have a doubt. Help me out. I have a doubt. He surrenders again and asks the Guru for clarification. Let's see what happens. Going on.
Iti atri sunura prishto bhargavena prasannadhihi matva yogyam prashnajatam pravuktum upachakrame. Thus asked by Bhargava, the son of Atri, Dattatreya, whose mind was pleased, began to explain all the questions, considering them as proper.
So he's pleased. These are subtle and good questions. And now he's going to answer them. Going on.
Rama buddhimatam sreshta nunam sprishasi tatpadam sadvimarsha paro yatvam hato jnatum prabhavitah. Rama, best of the intelligent, you certainly touch the position of knowledge of truth. Since you're devoted to proper reasoning, you're therefore capable of knowing it.
So he's saying your mind is subtle enough. You've done the homework, the tapas. You are capable of understanding this. Going on.
Etad eva hi tat shakti utpato yat sadhimarshanam bhagavat shakti patena vinakah shreya apnuyat. This alone, which is proper deliberation or reasoning, is indeed the descent of the power of grace of God. Without the descent of the power of grace of God, who can obtain the highest good?
So it's very interesting. Some of us can't even come in contact with this teaching. Others of us, we hear the teaching over and over and over again, but it does not take root. We're still caught up in the world, victimized by our attachments and identifications. But why is it that some rare souls get this, get it easily and quickly and deeply? Here the scripture says it's only by the grace of the mother. Other scriptures will frame it differently. They will say that what appears as capricious grace in this lifetime is actually the fruit of sadhana done in many lifetimes. One of the ideas that Krishna puts forward in Gita that I just love. Arjun says, what happens if I don't make it this lifetime? And I don't attain self-realization? Am I lost? Does it all just scatter like dust in the wind? And Krishna says, you can't take your toys with you. You can't take your wealth with you. You can't take your home, family, children, etc. But you do take your yoga with you when you die. So there's no capricious goddess out there who says, Ganesh is dumb. I don't like the way he parts his hair. Uday, on the other hand, oh, I like him. We're going to give him grace and he's going to get realized easily. Does not work that way. The grace of the mother is a constant. It's always pulling at us from the inside. Come home. Come. But this is a process that occurs over many lifetimes. Any thoughts on this before we go on?
I have a thought, Jim.
Yes.
So what you just said right now that this is the mother drawing us internally. So I should also then, with the same token, look at me suffering in my vasanas as also her doing, right?
It's all in God.
Right.
There is nothing that's outside of God. We're doing 10th chapter of Gita. And Krishna says, all these positive things are from me, all these negative things are from me. It's all in consciousness. But we have two forces operating in the human psyche. First is karma. Well, this didn't work, maybe I'll try that. Well, that didn't work, maybe I'll try this. Well, that didn't work, maybe I'll try that. So I'm a doctor, I'm an academic, I'm a musician, I'm a bank robber, I'm a horse thief, I'm a parent, I'm single. If that were the only thing going on, we'd just be going around in a circle forever. But underneath that is another pressure, the dharma. The mind is always questing, where is the good? Where is the good? Where is the good? I seek peace. I seek this joy. So it's not a circle, it's a spiral, bringing us always home. One of my favorite images is the soul is like a river. May start in the mountains, it's just a babbling brook. It may become a rushing torrent, but eventually it merges with the ocean. What the yogi wants to understand, at which point on the river's journey is it most beautiful? When is it a better river? No, it's just doing its river thing until it reaches the ocean. But just as gravity is the inevitable force that moves the river to the sea, so this divine discontent in every heart impels us all home to God. No one is left out. You can't even really fall off the path. If you try to fall off the path, your suffering will bring you back to it. Maybe not in this lifetime. Is that helpful?
Yes, Jim, thank you.
All right, going on.
Krityam atmadevataya chanihyetāvadev hi yat sadvimarshanam nityam vardhayet suprasadita. Know so much alone as the work of God, who is the self, that being well pleased, he should constantly increase proper deliberation or reasoning in the devotee.
So we invoke the grace of God through our Purushartha. The grace of God is always there, potentially, in every human heart. There's a famous Zen saying, enlightenment happens by accident. Zen makes you accident prone. By Zen here, we mean the practice, the meditation, the self-inquiry, the koan work, or whatever it is that you're doing. For us, abhyasa, our practice. One of the most ancient names for the divine is Surya. I love it because the sun has its nature. It just shines. It bestows heat and light, energy, warmth, goodness. But we have the capacity to cover up our heads, shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. What is it that we do to insulate ourselves from that? Ego in its various manifestations, selfishness, fear, need to control. All those things. Now, just like if I go outside with a paper sack over my head, it doesn't affect the sun. But in my superstition, I can pull the bag off and say, see, I have invoked the sun. The sun's grace has now come. No, the sun was there always. Likewise, the grace of the goddess, the grace of God is at constant. But we invoke it through our surrender. Through our practice. I think we've talked about this when we're talking a lot about Sankalpa. Prayer doesn't change God. prayer changes the one who's praying. Once we get that principle, it changes the way we pray. We respond to the grace of God when we get these intimations of grace. I love the language in the Catholic contemplative tradition. They call them consolations and desolations. When you're feeling just terrible and your meditation is dry and your ego is just doing all its things, that's a desolation. But then when you get these moments of grace, those are consolations. Those wonderful words to describe that process. Next one, going on.
यत्त्वया विदितं तत्तु तादृक् सत्यं न हीतरात् किन्तु तत्तादृशम् अपि त्वयोक्तं परचिद्वपुः न ते सुविदितं राम यत एवं वदस्यतः. What has been understood by you is indeed like that, not another really, Rama. But though it is like that, the nature of the supreme consciousness described by you is not well known to you since you speak in this manner.
So what he's basically saying, as I had mentioned with those four authorities, Rama has indirect knowledge. He has belief in the scriptures, he's understood them, he's investigated with it with a clear mind, he's reasoned it out, he agrees with it. But he has yet to have direct experience, or he wouldn't have this doubt. Going on.
ताटस्थ्येन तु यो यावद् वेद तावन्न वेद वै यतः सा विदिता सम्यक् ताटस्थ्यम् उपशामयेत् तटस्थ संवेदनं तु स्वप्न संवेदनोपमम्. One who knows, and as long as he knows the nature of, as long as he knows the nature of supreme consciousness by its apparent characteristic, which is distinct from its inherent nature, so excuse me, so long he indeed does not know, since that consciousness, well understood, would extinguish its apparent characteristic. Knowledge of the apparent characteristic, on the other hand, is similar to the knowledge in a dream.
Yes. So here he's again saying, just summing up, you have indirect knowledge, apparent knowledge, you kind of understand, but you are yet to be a man of steady wisdom. He's not yet a full knower of the Supreme who has retired into the Supreme. He's still in his head. Going on.
Yatha swapna nidhi praptihi purushanam nirarthika tatha tatastha vijnanam amukhya phaladam bhavet. As the gain of a treasure in a dream is useless for men, so the knowledge of the apparent characteristic would be the giver of a trivial result.
Yes. So it's ephemeral if it's just indirect knowledge. You may read the scriptures. You may think, oh, I really understand it. The world's all an illusion. I am that heartless Brahman. But then some tragedy happens in your life, or someone at work upsets you, or you have a fight with your spouse. You lose your serenity. Your knowledge was not sthita, steady. Going on.
Atra te kathyamishyami pragvrutam atishobhanam pura videheshu kaschit asid raja sudharmikah. In this matter, I shall tell you of a very splendid former occurrence. Formerly in the country of Videha, there was a certain king who was very virtuous.
So he's going to illustrate what he needs to know by means of another story. Going on. Who's this virtuous king?
Vriddha prajno hi janakaha prabhignata paravarah sakadachit swatma devi ije kratubhiruttamaihi. That king, Janaka, was indeed a person of great wisdom, who had known the higher and the lower knowledge. Once he worshipped the goddess, who was his own self, through excellent sacrifices.
So again, we have King Janaka, the father of Sita. And he is extolled in the literature as a man of the deepest realization. He did not leave his duties, his swadharma as king. He did not get realized and go off to the forest. No. He remained as king, ruled his country, fought his enemies, did all the things that a Raja is supposed to do. Yet he was a man of the highest wisdom. So let's see. There are various stories about the enlightenment of Janaka. In this one, King Janaka's worshiping the goddess. Let's see what happens.
Tatra jagmud brahmanadya vidyavantastapasvinah kalabhignya vaidikascha yadvanaschapi satrinah. There arrived brahmanas and others who were learned, practicing spiritual austerities, proficient in practical arts, well versed in the Vedas, performers of sacrifices, and also priests.
So he's having, for want of a better word, a convocation. So all these great learned people from all over come to the court of Janaka. Going on.
Tatkala eva varuno yashtum samupachakrame teno pahuta pipradya nayayustatra bhurishah janake hyabisampritaah pujitastena tarpitaah. At the same time, Varuna, the regent of the ocean, also began to perform a sacrifice. Brahmanas and others invited by him did not go there in large numbers, for they were completely happy with Janaka and were worshipped and pleased by him.
So Janaka is going to perform this puja, this sacrifice to the mother. he invites all these brahmanas to come, and they had problems with scheduling. They obviously in those days didn't have a Google Calendar, because Varuna in the bottom of the ocean decided he wanted to have a great convocation of the learned for a sacrifice that he was going to do, but they wouldn't come because they were all over in Janakas. Well, he gets a little upset. Let's see what happens. Going on.
Atha jagama varunad. Ayado bodha sampada. Vipravesha dharo netum. Brahmanan kutavartmana. Then the son of Varuna came there with his mental attainments, bearing the disguise of a Brahmana, to take the Brahmanas away by a fraudulent way.
So what happens is Varuna's son shows up at Janaka's place, and he's disguised as a young Brahmin, and he has devised a way to trick the guests of King Janaka to leave Janaka's convocation and come hang out with Varuna. Let's see how he does it.
Asadya yajna sadanam nrupam samyojya chashisha akshipatatra sabhyamstu shrinvatam cha sabhasadam rajamste yajna sadanam atyantam naiva shobhate kamalakaravat kaka kankavrindasya sanchayat. Reaching the place of the sacrifice and endowing the king with his blessings, he insulted the people there in the assembly and the members of the house. When the members of the assembly were hearing, King, your sacrificial house does not at all shine very much like a lake full of lotuses by the gathering of a large number of crows and herons.
So he shows up, does his honors to the king, but basically says, you've invited a bunch of stupid Brahmins. They may be able to chant the Vedas chapter and verse, but they don't know. They're stupid. So your honorable assembly is filled with dumbasses. Let's see what happens with this horrible public insult.
Sabha vidvat samudayaihi shobhini shobhate taram sharadam hamsa sanghataihi sharadam hamsa sanghataihi sapadmam tu saro yatha. A becoming assembly shines more by a multitude of scholars as an autumnal lake with lotuses by a multitude of swans.
So a good convocation should have really smart people. It would be comparable, like, for example, Uday, if you were to go to a professional conference as an academic, and you're presenting a paper, and everybody in the audience is scholars of inferior scholarship, and they can't even understand what you're saying with your paper. That's what he's accusing these people of.
It's a funny analogy.
Well, it's because understand that this is scholarship. This is people who are supposed to know philosophy. This is very different, There's a big difference between a pundit and a jnani.
Mm.
Pundit is a scholar. There's nothing wrong with scholarship. But a jnani is one who knows through direct experience. These Brahmins are scholars. They can do the ritual because they're priests. But do they even understand what they're doing when they do the ritual? That's another point. All right, going on.
Tadatra vidyavishadam na pashyami ekamapyalam swastitestu gamishyami natra me samstitir bhavet katham sabhamimam murkha prachuram samvishamyaham. Then I do not see surely even one person skilled in the sciences here. May it be well with you. I shall go. There cannot be any place for me here. How shall I enter this assembly filled with fools?
So he insults them so terribly by saying, I won't even stay. He's like the academic who says, you're such poor scholars, I'm not even going to bother to deliver my paper. See you later. Such an insult given to these people. Let's see what happens. Going on.
Evam varunina proktaha sabhyaschu krudhuranjasa kimare dvijabandho tvam adhikshipasi sarvatah. Thus addressed by the son of Varuna, the men in the assembly were instantly angry. You who pretend to be a Brahmana, why do you throw abuse all around?
So they're insulted and they're ready to do battle. And of course, what kind of battle do scholars do? They do tarka. What's tarka? Logic
Debate.
or argument. Sound familiar, Uday? Sound like some of your academic conferences?
Yeah.
Yes. And of course, if you can tear apart someone else's thesis, then you know that builds you up, that sort of thing. The exaltation of criticism. Anyway, let's see what happens. See if these Brahmanas take the bait that the son of Varuna is setting in the trap. Going on.
Keyam tavedrishi vidya yaya sarve vayam jitaha vritha kathasi durbuddhe jitvasmam stvam gamishyasi. What is this learning of yours of this kind by which all of us have been surpassed? Evil-minded one, you boast in vain. You shall go only after conquering us.
So they say, you can't leave. What is the knowledge you have that we don't have? We're learned Brahmanas. So they're going to engage in this intellectual combat. Let's see what happens.
Prayo bhuloka samsthana vidvamsa sangata khalu kim tvam bhulokame vadya jetumikshasi durmate. Learned men residing in this world have mostly come together here, surely. Evil-minded one, you wish to conquer now that very world.
So we're the world's greatest experts on absolutely everything. There's no way you can vanquish us in debate. Try. Going on.
ब्रूहि काते भवेद् विद्या ह्ययास्मान् जेतुमिच्छसि इत्युक्तवत्सु सभ्येषु वारुणिः पुनराहतान्. Say what may be your learning by which you wish to say what may be your learning by which you wish to conquer us. When the persons in this assembly were saying thus, the son of Varuna told them again.
So they've fallen into the trap. What's the topic? You're here with some of the greatest scholars in the world. What's your topic? See if you can vanquish us. Going on.
Samayena vijeshyami sarvan kshanamatrataha aham jito bhavadbhistu samudresyam nimajjitah yushmasvaham majjayami jitamathapi vad upetyaivam tu samayam vivadantu mayasaha. I shall conquer all of you in a moment with the stipulation. If I'm conquered by you, I may be sunk into the ocean, or I shall sink each conquered person among you into the ocean. Admitting this stipulation, you may dispute with me.
So they don't realize he is the son of the sea god. So his condition is, if I lose the battle, toss me into the sea, drown me. But if you lose the battle, I'm going to toss you into the sea. Let's see what happens. Going on.
Ityukta sammatim chakruhu sabhya vadayatena tu vivadam chakruratyantam tena varunina dvijaha. Thus told, the men in the assembly gave their concurrence for disputation with him. The Brahmanas disputed with that son of Varuna very much.
So they engage in the disputation, these classic philosophical arguments. And this form of intellectual combat is ancient in Indian culture. It goes back thousands of years where people would sharpen their understanding, sharpen their intellect by engaging in debate. I'm sure you've all heard of the stories of Shankara traveling all around India at a time when India was largely Buddhist. And he was able to vanquish all these various thinkers, these logicians, in debate. And of course, in those days, at the time of Shankara, if you were defeated, then you became the disciple of the tradition that the one who defeated you was. So that's the price tag. You went over to the other side. So let's see what happens here. Going on.
Jigaya varunir vipran vitanda jala Jigaya varunir vipran vitanda jala jalpavartmana sindhau nimajjita vipra shatashotha sahasrashah. The son of Varuna conquered the Brahmanas by the way of fallacious argument and wrangling discussion. The Brahmanas were sunk into the ocean by hundreds and thousands.
So this guy has a way of twisting logic, using fallacious logic, and he was able to defeat all of these Brahmanas one by one into this ocean. They go into the Sindhu, sunk. So his dad's going to have his Brahmanas. That's what the whole point of it is. Going on.
Nimajjitastu ye vipra tu taistair varunaihritaah varunam yajnamasadya mumuduh pujita bhrisham. But the Brahmanas who were sunk were carried away by the messengers of Varuna, and reaching the place of sacrifice of Varuna were happy, honored very much by Varuna.
So they have, I think they call it gillyweed in Harry Potter, where you can breathe underwater. So obviously these messengers of Varuna have gillyweed for them, because they're able to then go into the palace of Varuna, and they're very happy to be there. They're treated very, very well by the Lord of the Sea. So, give a Brahman a good meal and you can get a lot. That's what I would say. Going on.
Majjitam pitaram shrutva kaholam tatsutastatah ashtavakrasamāgatya nyātavaitandya jalpakah vijitya varunim sindha vadidesh vijitya varunim sindha vadidesha nimajjane. Thereafter, hearing that his father Kahola has been sunk into the ocean, his son Ashtavakra, who had learned fallacious arguments and wrangling debates, having conquered the son of Varuna, ordered his sinking into the ocean.
So let's quit here. So what has happened now is Ashtavakra, having heard that his father was one of the Brahmanas who got sunk into the ocean, he shows up and he's able to defeat the son of Varuna in debate. But we want to be able to take the time to get into how he did it and what were the arguments that he used. So I think this is a good place to stop. What verse are we on?
We just finished 47, 48.
47, 48. All right, so we'll do 49 next week. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Sri Guru Pyo Namaha. Hari Om. Oh, that's it. All right, thank you all. This is a fun story. I think you're going to like the way it turns out.
Thanks, Jim. Jim, I had just one quick question.
Please.
So as this story has progressed so far, you have this idea that you have an intellectual debate and the one who loses goes over to the other side, to quote your own words. And similarly, we heard about Shankara. But I'm just wondering, what is so different about today's age that you almost never hear of, a scholar on the left going over to the right or vice versa? Just people remain stuck where they are forever and ever.
Well, I think it's a fascinating insight, because none of these positions are usually rooted in logic.
Mm-hmm. Right.
They're rooted in people's feelings.
Mm.
I mean, for example, you take someone who absolutely won't take the vaccine. I don't want my personal freedom, violated. And then you say, well, do your children get vaccinated in order to go to kindergarten as children? Yeah. That was compulsory. They had to get smallpox, they had to get polio, they had to get whooping cough, all these childhood vaccinations. Do they do that in India? Vaccinate kids?
Oh, very much.
Yeah. And it's mandatory here. You can't send
Right.
your kids to school without them. And unless you have a religious exemption, like if you're a Christian Scientist or Seventh-day Adventist or something. And these same people will say, in other words, the logic fails, but they don't give up the position. Well, this is an experimental vaccine. This is an experimental vaccine. Well, actually, no, it's been through as much testing as any other. It's FDA fully approved. Well, it hasn't been around long enough. Well, I remember when the polio vaccine came out. I'm old enough.
Right.
People were jumping to take it because of how devastating polio was, especially for children. So it's not logical.
So
It's not
I'd
logical.
argue that that's a somewhat easier case to deal with. But what if I were to take the example, just for the sake of example, let's say someone like Noam Chomsky. His arguments are not based on feeling as much as maybe certain economic theory or whatever. People of that stature, you would never see switching, right?
Well, the thing that a lot of people, this is just my perception, is people have economic theory, but then when certain political parties actualize those theories with policy, then over a period of 50, 60, 70 years, can we then examine what are the ramifications of it?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not an economist, but for example, I can remember when Reagan came out with his trickle-down economics.
Mm-hmm.
People said, oh, it makes perfect sense logically. Well, the facts are it hasn't worked.
Right.
It may be a good idea, but in the actualization of the policy, it didn't work. People say, if you government is not the solution, government is the problem. Maybe so. There's certainly a lot of bureaucracy and fat and waste and corruption. But is getting rid of government the answer? We didn't know. We've gotten rid of a whole lot of parts of the government. And is it working?
Mm.
The Republicans had the policy, cut taxes, stimulate the economy, cut taxes. That's what's going to make everybody rich. When I was a kid after the Second World War, the top tax rate was actually, I think, close to 90%. A lot of wealthy people, it was like 60%. Now, the end result is the US government had surpluses. We were able to build a highway system. We sent people to the moon, and we had the GI Bill. We were able to ensure education and loans. We had built a middle class in this country. Then when they started this decades-long practice, cut taxes, cut taxes, cut taxes. Well, the end result is we don't have much of a middle class anymore. That's the facts. But see, people get stuck on a belief and they don't look at the actual facts. We have more poverty than we did 20, 30 years ago. And we have mega rich people.
Hmm.
I mean, what's his name? Jeff Bezos. He has more money than some countries.
Yeah, it's insane.
Then we turn around and you look at, for example, the rising phenomenon of homelessness in the US.
Mm. Mhm.
Now, this one of the solutions people are doing is they want to build these little plywood shacks with no electricity and no plumbing, just to get people out of the elements. I think maybe as a short-term solution, but you know, I've traveled in India.
Mm.
And you know, I can remember coming in by train into Calcutta, where there were miles and miles and miles of the same thing.
Right.
So my concern is I don't think it's a solution. I don't know what the solution is. I have no idea what the solution is. But I'm not sure that's a solution. But I don't know. I'm not smart enough. But I think when it comes to things like economics, especially, and economic policy and social policy, we always have to look at the empirical results.
Right.
Another really interesting one, back in the 90s, crack cocaine was an enormous blight on African American communities.
Mm-hmm.
And along with it came huge crime rates. And it was the African American people who wanted more policing, cleaning up their communities, make them safer. So there was the crime bill that came out in '95. It was one of the things, for example, Joe Biden really got a lot of grief for in the election.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
he was for it. But everybody was for it. But there was unintended consequences.
Mm.
Nobody was able to think through the ramifications enough to see what the long-term consequences would be about the inequality of incarceration. You know,
Right.
white guy gets arrested for powdered cocaine, gets a much lighter sentence than a black guy gets for the same amount of cocaine, but it's raw cocaine that he's smoking, crack.
Mm.
It's totally illogical, but huge differences in sentencing guidelines. So, you know, I don't have answers, but I think there's
Right.
more than just logic.
Yeah, I probably also the fact that in today's day and age, the amount of information and facts that are available has increased so much that rather than helping people come to a conclusion, you can selectively come to any conclusion that your feelings will sort of prod you towards.
Well, I call it bias confirmation.
Right, exactly.
So, for example, I have a young man, a friend, who's a vaccine denier. And he keeps wanting to send me articles that he's found on the internet that confirm his bias.
Yeah.
And he thinks that's research. That's not research, that's bias confirmation.
Yeah, and there is, I mean, you can find an internet article that confirms anything that you want.
Exactly.
Oh, well.
Good point. Good point. But what we're going to find is argument is not a way to ultimately find spiritual truth. There's proper reasoning that takes us beyond the mind. But as we get into the dialogue between Ashtavaka and Janaka, we'll see how that works out.
Wonderful.
Very cool part, the next part.
Looking forward.
All right, Hari Om.
Hari Om. Thank you, Jim.
Good night.